It's been almost 5 years since my mom disappeared without a trace. One day she was just gone. No note, no phone call, no explanation. The police looked into it for a while, but eventually they chalked it up as an unsolved missing person case like so many others. But I never gave up. I couldn't. Not when she was my mom. Not when she was the only person who ever really cared about me. I was 17 when she disappeared. I'm 22 now, still living in the same crappy apartment we shared. The walls are still yellowed with age and the floor creaks under every step. I kept everything of hers exactly how she left it. It's like I'm afraid if I change something, she'll never come back. Her clothes are still hanging in the closet, her toothbrush still in the bathroom cup. I know it's pathetic, but I can't bring myself to move on. Because deep down, something tells me she didn't just leave. It started with an email. I was sitting in bed, scrolling through my laptop late one night, lost in a sea of Reddit rabbit holes. I wasn't even looking for anything related to my mom anymore. I had done that for years, and it always led nowhere. The internet's a big place, but it's got limits, you know. And then my inbox pinged. At first I thought it was just junk mail, another your car's extended warranty crap. But the subject line froze me in my tracks. I know what happened to her. There wasn't a name, just a scrambled bunch of letters and numbers in the email address. No signature, no introduction, nothing, just those 5 words. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding so loud, I thought it might wake up my neighbor next door. I didn't think, I just clicked. Inside was a single link, no text, no explanation, just a URL that looked weird, like one of those deep web links you're warned never to click. But I was desperate. I clicked it. My screen went black for a few seconds. I thought maybe I'd just downloaded some nasty virus or ransomware. Then, a page loaded. It looked like a message board, but everything was written in some language I didn't recognize, like code or symbols. But before I could close it out, a message popped up. "Do you want to know the truth?" Without thinking, I typed back, "Yes." Another message came through almost instantly. "Find the truth in the dark. Password, lost.soul. The page refreshed, and suddenly I was looking at what felt like a portal to something I should never have found. A dark website, full of forums with titles I didn't even want to understand. But I didn't care about any of that. I typed the password into the search bar, and the results filled my screen. There were dozens of threads, all connected to the same topic: missing persons. I hesitated. This was beyond what I was used to, but I couldn't stop myself. I clicked on the first thread that caught my eye. It was labeled with the exact date my mom had disappeared. My stomach dropped as I read the posts. It wasn't just about my mom. There were other names too, people who had vanished under similar circumstances, women mostly, and all around the same age as her. The posts were full of gruesome details, stories that made me sick. Stories of people being abducted, tortured, and sold. One post in particular stuck out to me. It was from an anonymous user who claimed to have seen my mum being dragged into a van by men in black masks. They talked about the way she screamed, how she tried to fight, but was overpowered. My hands started shaking as I read more. The post said she was taken somewhere underground to be used. I didn't understand at first, but as I kept reading, the horrifying reality started to sink in. They weren't just abducting people, they were trafficking them. The last sentence was burned into my brain. If you want to find her, you'll have to make a deal, but once you enter, there's no way out. I didn't sleep that night. I spent hours combing through the site, finding more and more disturbing details. There were threads with pictures, videos, and lists of people who had been taken. I thought I saw my mom's name in one of the lists, but it disappeared when I clicked on it. The more I dug, the darker things got. I found forums where people were discussing auctions for humans, women, children, men, sold to the highest bidder. My mom wasn't just missing. She was part of something much bigger, much darker than I ever could have imagined. The next morning, I woke up to a knock at the door. I hadn't ordered anything and I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was confused. When I opened the door, There was a package sitting on the ground. No name, no return address. Just a plain brown box. I don't know why I didn't think to call the police. Maybe because I knew deep down they wouldn't help. They hadn't helped before, and they sure as hell wouldn't now. I took the package inside and opened it. Inside was a small, black notebook. It looked old, like something from a different era, with yellowed pages and a cracked leather cover. I flipped it open, and the first page made my blood run cold. Property of Elizabeth Callahan. My mum's name. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, some in my mum's neat cursive, others in a messy scrawl I didn't recognize. It was like a journal, detailing things I didn't understand. Weird symbols, strange phrases, and what looked like descriptions of people I didn't know. Then I reached the last page. Scrawled in shaky, frantic writing were the words, "They're watching, don't trust anyone, I'm sorry." That's when I noticed something even worse. There were pictures tucked into the back of the notebook. Pictures of my mom, tied up in some dark, dingy room. Her face was swollen, bruised, and her eyes were filled with terror. My hands shook as I looked through them. In the last photo, there was a man standing behind her, wearing a mask. He was holding something in his hand, a syringe, and I knew, deep down, that whatever had happened to my mom, whatever they'd done to her, I was never going to be able to erase these images from my mind. But it wasn't just the pictures that got to me. It was the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. From that moment on, I felt like I was being watched. Every time I left the house, there was a shadow behind me. Every time I looked out my window, I thought I saw someone standing across the street just out of sight. It was subtle at first, just a feeling. But as the days passed, it got worse. And then, one night, I woke up to the sound of my front door creaking open. I froze the second I heard the door creak. You know that feeling when you wake up, and for a split second, you're not sure if you're dreaming or if it's real. That's what this felt like, except it was very real. My heart was racing, pounding against my chest so hard I thought it might explode. I didn't have any roommates, and I sure as hell didn't invite anyone over. So who the hell was in my apartment? The hallway light was casting a faint glow through the crack in my bedroom door. I could see the shadow moving in the hallway, a tall figure, slow and deliberate. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just lay there, praying it was a nightmare. Then the floor creaked again, closer this time. I knew whoever it was, they were coming for me. I reached under my bed, feeling for the bat I kept hidden for emergencies. I hadn't touched it since I bought it, but suddenly it felt like my only lifeline. My fingers wrapped around the cold metal, and I gripped it tight, ready to swing the second they opened the door. But they didn't open the door. They stood just outside it. I could see the shadow now, bigger than I expected, looming in front of my door. I could hear breathing, slow and heavy, like whoever was on the other side was enjoying this, savoring it. Then came the whisper. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even clear at first. But it was there, right outside my bedroom door. "You shouldn't have looked." My stomach twisted in knots. The voice was low, gravelly, like it had been dragged through a lifetime of cigarettes. It didn't sound human. It sounded wrong. I felt my body go cold, sweat pouring down my back. I don't remember making the decision, but somehow I found myself slowly climbing out of bed, careful not to make a sound. My eyes were locked on the door, my mind screaming at me to get out, to run, to do anything but stay there. But I couldn't move fast. If I made any noise, they'd know. And then, God knows what they'd do. I took a slow step toward the window, still gripping the bat, my breath shallow, almost silent. The shadow didn't move. They just stood there like they were waiting. For what? For me to come out? For me to do something stupid? When I reached the window, I realized the worst part of my shitty apartment. It was on the second floor. Jumping out would probably break something, but staying in the room didn't seem like a much better option. Then, as I reached for the latch, I heard the door handle jiggle. They were coming in. In that split second,
Instinct took over. I threw open the window, not caring about the noise anymore, and climbed out onto the fire escape. I almost slipped on the rusted metal, catching myself just in time as I scrambled down the stairs. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But I heard the door burst open behind me, followed by footsteps, fast, heavy, coming right for me. I jumped the last few steps, landing hard on the pavement. My ankle twisted under me, sending a sharp pain shooting up my leg, but I didn't stop. I ran. I ran like my life depended on it, because I knew it did. The street was eerily quiet. It was 3 a.m., and the only light came from the flickering street lamp on the corner. No cars, no people, just me and whoever the hell was chasing me.
I could hear their footsteps behind me, getting closer with every step. I didn't dare turn around, but I could feel them closing in. My chest burned, and my legs felt like they were going to give out, but I pushed harder, ignoring the pain in my ankle. I cut down an alley, hoping to lose them, but it was a dead end. Of course it was. I slammed into the brick wall, my breathing ragged, my body shaking. This was it. I turned around, gripping the bat so hard my knuckles turned white. The footsteps stopped at the mouth of the alley, and then I saw them. He was tall, way taller than I expected, dressed in all black, with a hood pulled over his face. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel them. He was just standing there like he was waiting for something, like he was deciding what to do with me. My mind was racing. Who the hell was this guy? Why was he after me? What did I do to piss him off so badly? And then it hit me. The dark web. I thought back to the message board, to the pictures, to the notebook. I shouldn't have gone digging. I shouldn't have clicked that link. Whatever I had gotten myself into, this was the consequence. The man took a step toward me, and that's when I saw it. He had something in his hand. A syringe, just like the one from the photos. My heart stopped. "You're coming with me." His voice was low, the same one I heard outside my bedroom door. I raised the bat, my arms shaking. I knew I couldn't take him. He was huge and I was already worn out from running, but I wasn't going down without a fight. "Stay the fuck away from me," I screamed, my voice cracking. He didn't stop. He didn't even hesitate. He just kept walking toward me, syringe in hand. I swung the bat. It connected with his arm, and I heard a sickening crack. But he didn't flinch. He didn't make a sound. He just grabbed the bat out of my hands and tossed it aside like it was nothing. Before I could react, he was on me. His hand wrapped around my throat, squeezing hard enough that I couldn't breathe. My vision started to blur, and I felt the cold tip of the syringe press against my skin. "Don't fight it. It's already over." I was gasping for air, my hands clawing at his arm, but he didn't loosen his grip. The syringe pushed deeper into my neck, and I felt the cold liquid enter my veins, and then everything went black. I woke up hours later, tied to a chair in a dark, windowless room. My head was pounding, and my vision was blurry, but I could still make out the shape of the man standing in front of me. He was holding the notebook, my mum's notebook. "You shouldn't have looked," he said again, his voice calm, almost casual. "But now that you know, you're going to help us." I tried to speak, but my throat was raw. My hands were bound behind me, and I could barely move. I felt the weight of something pressing down on me, like I wasn't just tied to the chair, but trapped in something much bigger, something I couldn't escape. The man knelt down in front of me, bringing his face inches from mine. I could smell the sweat and the staleness of his breath. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knew they'd won. "Your mom," he said, his voice a low growl. "She didn't play by the rules. Neither did you." I felt my stomach turn. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. When I woke up again, I wasn't sure how much time had passed. My head was swimming, and everything was fuzzy, like I was trying to think through a fog. My hands were still tied, my wrists raw from struggling. The room was dim, lit only by a single hanging bulb that flickered occasionally. casting eerie shadows on the concrete walls. It smelled damp, like mold and decay, and the air was thick with the kind of oppressive silence that made your ears ring. I could feel something was off in my body, like that syringe had done more than knock me out. My throat felt tight, dry, and my muscles ached as if I'd been drugged and left like that for hours. But worse than that, I could feel something in my veins, like my blood wasn't mine anymore. The thought of it made my skin crawl. Then I heard him again, the man. His footsteps echoed down the hallway outside the room, steady, unhurried. He wasn't in any rush. He knew I wasn't going anywhere. The door creaked open and he stepped inside. The light flickered, casting his shadow long against the wall. He wasn't alone this time. 2 others followed him in, both wearing the same black hooded jackets. I couldn't see their faces, just their eyes, cold and calculating, like they weren't even human. "You've had time to think," the man said, his voice the same low rasp that had haunted me since that night in my apartment. "You've had time to accept that you're in this now, whether you like it or not." I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. No sound came out, just a pathetic croak. The man grinned, amused by my struggle. "Don't worry," he said, stepping closer. "I'm not here to hurt you. Yet." He pulled up a chair, sitting directly in front of me, his knees almost touching mine. The 2 others stood behind him, watching me like I was some kind of prey. I could feel their eyes on me, but I didn't dare meet their gaze. There was something wrong about them, something deeply, fundamentally wrong. The way they moved, the way they stood there, too still. They didn't feel real. The man leaned in, his face inches from mine. I could smell his breath again, that staleness mixed with something metallic, something sharp. "You're going to help us," he said softly, like we were just having a casual conversation. "And in return, we'll let you live." I blinked, trying to process what he was saying. Help them? Live? What the hell was he talking about? He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black device, a phone or something like it. He held it up so I could see the screen and my heart dropped. It was a live video feed. And on the screen, in some dark room just like the one I was in, was my mom. She was alive. She was tied to a chair just like I was, her face bruised and gaunt, her eyes wide with terror. But she was alive. Barely. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened and my vision blurred with tears. After all this time, she was still alive. They had her. They had her this whole time. "You recognize her," the man said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "I'm sure you do. She's been very helpful to us. But now, it's your turn." I shook my head, trying to clear the fog that still clung to my brain. This couldn't be real. None of this could be real. But it was. It was horrifyingly real. "What do you want?" I finally managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled, leaning back in his chair, satisfied that I was finally talking. "It's simple," he said. "There are things happening on the dark web, things most people will never see, never even imagine. But you stumbled onto something you shouldn't have. You looked where you weren't supposed to look, and now you're in deep." He tapped the phone, and the image of my mom flickered. "We need you to do something for us. You're going to deliver a message." "What kind of message?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. He leaned forward again, his eyes narrowing. "You're going to make a video. A warning. You're going to tell everyone what happens when they stick their nose where it doesn't belong. You're going to tell them what happens when they start digging into the wrong corners of the web." I shook my head. "No, I can't." Before I could finish, the man slammed his fist on the table, making me jump. "You don't have a choice," he snapped, his voice sharp and cold. "You either do this, or your mother dies, and you'll watch it happen, slowly." He pulled up another image on the phone. This time, it was a video. A man, strapped to a chair like my mom, being tortured. I couldn't look away. The screams, the blood, the way they were cutting him piece by piece. My stomach turned, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just some threat. This was real. They were showing me what they'd do to her. I swallowed hard, trying to keep the panic from overwhelming me. I had no choice. None. They had her. If I didn't do what they wanted, they'd kill her. "What do you want me to say?" I asked, my voice hollow. The man smiled again, like he knew he'd won. "We'll give you the script. You just have to read it. Make it believable, make it real. And then, when it's done, we'll let you both go." I didn't believe him for a second. There was no way they were going to let us go. But what choice did I have? At least if I went along with it, I might buy some time. Time to figure something out. Time to save her. They untied me, but I was too weak to stand. My legs felt like jelly, and my head was still spinning. The two other men dragged me up, practically carrying me out of the room and down a long, dark hallway. The walls were lined with doors, and I could hear things behind them. Whispers, cries, the kind of sounds that make your skin crawl. They brought me to another room, this one set up like some kind of studio. There was a camera on a tripod, lights glaring down on a chair in the center of the room. They pushed me into the chair, and the man handed me a piece of paper. "Read it. Convince them," he said, stepping back behind the camera. I looked down at the paper, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold it. The words were simple, but the meaning behind them was anything but. I was supposed to tell people that if they kept digging into the dark web, they'd end up like me. That there were people out there watching, waiting, and if they didn't stop, they'd disappear, just like my mom. I couldn't do it. I couldn't sit there and lie to the world, knowing they had my mom, knowing they were going to hurt her if I didn't comply, but I had no choice. I started reading, my voice flat and monotone. I didn't have the energy to pretend, to act like I believed the words I was saying. But the man behind the camera didn't seem to care. He just watched, his expression cold and unreadable. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then he nodded, satisfied. "Good," he said. "That wasn't so hard, was it?" I didn't respond. I couldn't. I felt like I was going to throw up. They untied me again and dragged me back to the room where they'd kept me before. My mom's face, that video of her tied up, kept flashing in my mind. I had to get her out. I had to save her. But how? As they shut the door behind me, locking me inside again, I realized something. This wasn't just about me anymore. There were more people, hundreds, maybe thousands, caught up in this. And the dark web. It wasn't just some place where you could find illegal goods or disturbing videos. It was a hunting ground, a place where they found people like me, people like my mom, and once they had you, they never let you go. I sat in the dark for what felt like hours after they threw me back into that room. My head was spinning, my heart racing, and my mind refusing to accept what I had just done. I'd read their script, made their video, and followed their commands. And yet, I knew it wasn't going to be enough. These people, whatever they were, they didn't let you go once they had you. They didn't just let people walk away. The silence around me was oppressive. It wasn't just the lack of sound. It was the weight of something wrong hanging in the air, something unnatural. It was like the walls themselves were pressing in on me, suffocating me. I had to get out of here. I had to figure out a way to save my mom. I ran my hands over the restraints they'd left on me this time. They were loose, sloppy, like they didn't think I was worth keeping too tightly tied. Maybe they were getting careless, or maybe they thought I was too broken to fight back. I guess they figured once you've made that first compromise, you'd keep bending until you snapped completely. But they didn't know me. I pulled at the rope, gritting my teeth as it dug into my wrists. Slowly, inch by inch, the knot began to loosen. It took what felt like an eternity, but finally, I was free. I stood up, my legs shaky, and looked around the room. There was nothing in here, no windows, no vents, nothing I could use to get out. But there was a door. I knew it would be locked, but I had to try. I crept over to it, pressing my ear against the wood, listening for any sound on the other side. Nothing, just the same thick silence that seemed to fill every inch of this place. I wrapped my hand around the doorknob, praying it would somehow be unlocked. It wasn't. Of course it wasn't. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I wasn't going to die here. Not like this. I started scanning the walls, feeling for anything I could use, any crack, any tool, anything that could help me break out. And then I saw it. A small vent, just big enough to crawl through if I could pry off the cover. It wasn't much, but it was a chance. I grabbed the edge of the vent cover, yanking at it with everything I had. It was bolted in tight, but the screws were rusted. I pulled harder, my fingers raw, until finally it came loose with a loud metallic screech that echoed through the room. I froze. The noise had been loud, too loud. For a few seconds, I didn't breathe, just listening. If they heard me, I was dead. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, just silence. I clambered into the vent, feeling the sharp edges dig into my knees and elbows as I crawled through the narrow, claustrophobic tunnel. The air was thick with dust, and every breath I took felt like I was inhaling dirt, but I kept going. There was no turning back now. The vent was long, twisting and turning in ways that made me feel disoriented and sick. I had no idea where I was going, but anywhere had to be better than that room. I kept moving forward, the darkness swallowing me whole, until finally I saw a faint light ahead. I reached the end of the vent and peeked through the grate. Below me was a dimly lit hallway, empty as far as I could see. I pushed the grate open and dropped down quietly, landing on the cold concrete floor with a soft thud. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. The hallway stretched out in both directions, but I had no idea which way led out. I didn't have time to think. I just picked a direction and started running, my bare feet slapping against the cold ground. The place was a maze, twisting corridors, rooms that looked identical, all leading to dead ends. I was starting to panic, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I ran, knowing that at any moment they could catch me. I turned a corner, and that's when I saw it, a door. It wasn't like the others. This one was heavy, steel, with a keypad next to it. There was a camera above it too, its red light blinking. My heart sank. There was no way I was getting through without a code. But as I stood there staring at the door, something strange happened. The camera light flickered, then turned off, and then the door clicked open. I hesitated for only a second. This was a trap. It had to be. But what choice did I have? I had to get out. I had to find my mom. I pushed the door open and stepped through. What I saw on the other side stopped me dead in my tracks. It was a massive room, dark except for a few flickering lights overhead. And in the center of the room was a chair, the same kind of chair they had tied me to. And sitting in that chair, bound and gagged, was my mom. She looked worse than before, gaunt, bruised, her hair matted with blood. Her eyes were wide with terror, and when she saw me, she started struggling against her restraints, trying to scream through the gag. "Mom!" I rushed toward her, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm here! I'm going to get you out of here!" I reached for the ropes binding her, but before I could touch them, I heard a voice behind me. "Step away from her." I spun around, and there he was, the man in black, the one who had been following me since that night in my apartment. But he wasn't alone this time. The two others were with him, standing just behind him like shadows, and in his hand, he held a gun. "You've done well so far," he said, his voice calm, almost casual. "But this is where it ends."
I backed away from my mom, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. I had come so far. I had found her. I couldn't lose her now. "Let her go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've got me. Just let her go." The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "It's not that simple." He stepped closer, the gun still pointed at me. "You see your mom? She was supposed to be a lesson. But she didn't learn. She fought back, and now you're doing the same." He raised the gun, aiming it at my head. "But don't worry, you won't have to suffer for long." My mind was screaming at me to do something, anything,
I couldn't just stand there and let this happen. I had to act. I lunged forward, grabbing a piece of broken metal from the floor and swinging it at him with everything I had. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the small room. I felt something hot tear through my side, but I didn't stop. I slammed the metal into his arm, knocking the gun out of his hand. He stumbled back, surprised, but not for long. The others moved toward me, their hands reaching out to grab me. But I wasn't thinking anymore. I was in survival mode. I grabbed the gun off the floor and fired. The first shot missed, but the second hit one of the men square in the chest. He dropped like a stone. The other one hesitated, then backed away, his hands up. I kept the gun trained on him, breathing hard. "Let her go," I said again, my voice shaking. The man in black just smiled, blood dripping from his arm where I had hit him. "You think you're in control now?" he asked, his voice mocking. "You think you've won?" He nodded toward my mom. I turned just in time to see her eyes go wide, her body convulsing in the chair. I rushed to her side, but it was too late. Something was happening, something inside her. I watched in horror as her skin began to stretch, her veins bulging under the surface, her face twisted in pain, her body shaking violently. She tried to scream, but nothing came out except a gurgle. And then, with one final shudder, she went still. "No!" I screamed, grabbing her shoulders, shaking her. "Mom, no, please, no." But she was gone. I turned to the man, rage boiling inside me. "What did you do to her?" He laughed, a low, cruel sound. "She was never going to survive. She was infected, just like you." My blood ran cold. "What?" He stepped forward, his smile widening. "You didn't think that syringe was just a sedative, did you? You've got the same thing inside you now. It's only a matter of time." I felt the world spin around me. The wound in my side was throbbing, and I could feel something wrong spreading through me. My vision blurred, my head pounding with the weight of what he was saying. I wasn't going to survive this, and I was next. I don't know how I managed to get out of that room, but somehow I did. My side was burning, and I could feel the blood soaking through my shirt. But it wasn't just the wound. It was whatever they had put inside me, whatever they had injected into my veins. My head felt like it was splitting open, my vision flashing in and out, and my body was betraying me, turning against itself. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let it end like this. I stumbled through the maze of hallways, gripping the gun so tightly my fingers were cramping. The faces of the men I had shot flashed in my mind, but I pushed them aside. There wasn't time for guilt. There wasn't time for anything but survival. I had to get out of here. I had to figure out what they had done to me. And then I had to make them pay. The hallways seemed endless, but somehow I found my way back to the vent, the same one I had crawled through to escape before. I climbed back in, my body screaming in protest as I dragged myself through the tight space, feeling like every inch was pulling me deeper into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. As I crawled, my mind raced. What had that man meant? Infected? What was happening to me? I didn't know how much time I had left before whatever it was took over completely, but I could feel it creeping through my veins like poison. Every breath hurt. Every movement felt like it was tearing me apart from the inside. I finally made it out of the vent and dropped down into the alley behind the building. The cool night air hit my face like a slap, but it didn't bring me any comfort. I was out, but I wasn't free. Not yet. I forced myself to keep moving, one painful step at a time, until I reached the street. It was empty, quiet, like the world didn't even know the horrors I had just escaped from. I knew I couldn't go home. I couldn't go to the police. No one would believe me. Hell, I barely believed what was happening to me. But I knew where I had to go. There was only one place left. It was almost dawn by the time I reached the apartment. It was a shitty place, in a shitty part of town, but I knew he'd be there. I pounded on the door, my fist weak but frantic. After a few moments, the door creaked open, and a pair of bloodshot eyes stared back at me. It was Marcus, an old friend of mine who had gotten deep into the dark web years ago. He looked like shit, his hair a tangled mess, his clothes stained with God knows what, but I didn't care. He was the only one who might understand. "Jesus, man," he muttered, looking me up and down. "What the fuck happened to you?" I pushed past him into the apartment, collapsing onto the worn couch, my body shaking with exhaustion and pain. "I need your help," I gasped. "They've got my mom. They've got me. I don't know what they did, but it's inside me, Marcus. It's inside me." He frowned, closing the door behind him and grabbing a beer off the table. "What the hell are you talking about?" I told him everything. I told him about the email, the dark web forum, the men who had taken me, the video they made me record, the infection. I told him about my mom, how she had died right in front of me, her body convulsing, changing. I could barely keep my thoughts straight, but I got it all out. Marcus listened, his expression growing darker with every word. When I finished, he didn't say anything for a long time, just stared at the floor, his hands shaking. "Fuck," he finally muttered, standing up and pacing the room. "I've heard about this. I thought it was just some dark web urban legend, a scare tactic, but Jesus, man, this is real." "What is it?" I asked, barely able to keep my eyes open. "What did they do to me?" He rubbed his face, his eyes wild with fear. "They call it the program. It's some fucked up experiment, man, some deep state black market shit. They've been testing it on people for years, injecting them with something. It changes you, breaks you down piece by piece, turns you into, I don't know, something else, something not human anymore." I felt my stomach turn. "How do I stop it?" He shook his head, his voice low. "You don't. No one gets out once they're in. Your mum, she was already too far gone. And now, so are you." I felt like I was going to be sick. I had come here hoping for answers, for a way to fix this. But there was no fix, no cure. I was already dead. I just didn't know it yet. "What do they want with us?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Marcus stopped pacing, staring at me with a hollow expression. "They're building something. An army, maybe. Something worse. I don't know, man. But whatever it is, you're a part of it now, and there's no getting out." I sat there, numb, trying to wrap my head around what he was saying. An army? For what? For who? Suddenly, Marcus's phone buzzed on the table, breaking the silence. He glanced at it, his face going pale. He didn't answer it, just stared at the screen. "What is it?" I asked, my heart racing again. He looked at me, fear in his eyes. "It's them. They know you're here." Before I could react, the door burst open, and the man in black stepped into the room, flanked by two others. I recognized them immediately, the same dead-eyed men who had dragged me into that dark room, who had watched as my mum died. I tried to stand, but my body wouldn't listen. I was too weak, too far gone. Marcus backed away, his hands raised, but I knew there was no point. We were trapped. The man in black smiled that same cold, cruel smile as he stepped closer. "You thought you could run?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "There's no escaping this. You belong to us now." I could feel the sickness inside me, spreading faster now, taking over. My vision blurred, my head pounding, and I knew it was only a matter of time before I became whatever they had turned my mom into, whatever they were turning all of us into. Marcus made a run for it, but one of the men grabbed him, slamming him to the floor. I heard the sickening crack of his skull hitting the concrete, but I couldn't move. I couldn't save him. I couldn't save myself. The man in black knelt down in front of me, his cold eyes staring into mine. "You should have just played along," he whispered almost gently. "It would have been easier." And then everything went dark. I woke up in a room. It was different from the one before, but the feeling was the same. Dark, empty, cold. My wrists were bound again, but this time it didn't matter. I was too weak to fight, too broken. And then I saw her, my mom. She was standing in the corner, her body twisted, her eyes empty. She looked wrong, like something had hollowed her out, leaving nothing but a shell behind. "Mom?" I whispered, my voice cracking. She didn't respond. She just stared at me, unblinking, her mouth slightly open as if she was trying to remember how to speak. And then, in the darkness, I heard them. The voices, whispering, "You're one of us now." The door opened, and the man in black stepped inside, his smile wider than ever. "Welcome to the family," he said, and then everything stopped. My heart, my breath, my mind. Because I wasn't me anymore, I was one of them. And it was too late to escape.